Hello and welcome to another episode of the Morningscape podcast. I am Matt Moody, running it solo for the Thursday, November 1st daily fantasy slate. So, as you may be able to tell, I am missing DJ tonight. Um, Interestingly, as the clock strikes midnight on the East Coast, DJ, it's his birthday. However, that is not what he is out doing or celebrating. He is actually studying for an insurance exam. So, definitely best of luck to DJ there, but also a happy birthday. So, hopefully he has a good one, even without the normal, I think, Halloween drinking um, shenanigans that normally go on in the house of DJ. So, with that covered, we have a 12 game slate on the docket for Thursday. So, not really a ton of time to fool around. But first off, if you're listening to this in the morning at 2 o'clock Eastern time, there is a showdown slate for Florida and Winnipeg. They are playing over in Finland. So if you decide to throw in a team or two for that, I just wanted to mention we do have like lines and updates for those two teams. So at least to start for both of these teams, because remember, these two teams have been pretty scattered throughout the start of the year, lines wise. But Ellers playing with Shifley and Wheeler for the Jets. Second line, Kyle Connor, Brian Little, Matthew Perreault. Line A on the third line with Chris, Brandon Tanev, and Adam Lowry. So that's not great for line A. Obviously, first power play still intact, and the first power play should look like Kyle Connor, Shifley, Wheeler, and Dustin Byfuglien. Um, so that's the Winnipeg news. And then for Florida, pretty much status quo, but Mike Hoffman is on the second line with Huberdeau and Trocheck. Unfortunately, their most recent game, we saw that line playing with Barkov, Dadonov, um, and Hoffman left off of it. So not really too much good news for Hoffman there, except that he is now in the top six. And on the power play, Keith Yandel should be with Huberdeau, Trocheck, Dadonov, Barkov, as I mentioned. So just a little bit of recap to kind of get you going for the showdown slate, should you choose to play it. But yeah, I don't really think it's worth discussing a showdown slate entirely. One, people might not listen to this early afternoon, and two, it's just kind of like if I say three plays, well, there's half my lineup. So it's different when you're looking at a huge slate with when there's goalies involved or whatever. It's pretty tough for you guys to exactly copy my cash team or a GBP lineup just because there's so many different ways to go on these bigger slates. So if that is something that you guys really do want to hear, though, be sure to let us know in the group me. Um, these showdown slates, they obviously are posted around the same time. So if there's like some huge demand there, we could look at them in some smaller slate action. But primarily, we're going to focus on the main slates when we do these podcasts. So going to Thursday night, starting at 7 on the East Coast, we have 12 games. First being Dallas at Toronto. Toronto being without Austin Matthews. Dallas, interestingly, being without Alex Radulov, despite him playing on Tuesday. He either re-aggravated his injury or he just didn't feel right because he played pretty much the entire game, but will be out on Thursday. So keep that in mind when looking at this game. Pittsburgh at the Islanders, a rematch of a surprising Pittsburgh loss from Tuesday night. Washington at Montreal. Buffalo at Ottawa, New Jersey at Detroit. Detroit missing Thomas Vanek in addition to what I believe is a likely absence of Athanasiou and Nielsen. I didn't see anything, so I didn't look too hard into that. But again, they also lost Thomas Vanek, so Detroit really hurting up front. Nashville at Tampa. Tampa likely being without Victor Hedman. So actually, well, Hedman is definitely out. And interestingly, instead of Mikhail Sergachev, as we mentioned on Tuesday night, it was actually Ryan McDonough who stepped into that first unit power play role for the Lightning. So I guess a bit of intrigue there. Um, and McDonough is definitely a safer all around play. So interesting bit of news there. Vegas at St. Louis. St. Louis activating Robbie Fabry off of IR. He is going to be in a fourth line role, but definitely good to see there. I believe St. Louis also just activated, was it Edmondson, Gunnarsson, something or other? But it does appear that Vince Dunn will stay in the lineup. So that's really the only, I think, daily fantasy guy not named Pietrangelo on the blue line that's of note, especially with guys coming off of injury, but Dunn should be still in the lineup. Going on to the next game, Colorado at Calgary. Tyson Jost will be out for the Avalanche, meaning that Vladislav Kamenev will be centering the second line for Colorado. Nothing crazy, 2.5, just a pure pump play, but a guy with a lot of talent came over in a trade from the Predators, so we'll touch on him a little bit as well. Chicago at Edmonton. Chicago playing on a road back-to-back as they are in Vancouver currently. The Rangers continue their Western road trip, take on Anaheim. Philly at Los Angeles. The Kings got back Dustin Brown over the weekend. I'm not sure if he's going to be on a lot of radars, but again, a guy I'll touch on a little bit later. And lastly, Columbus at San Jose. San Jose is kind of a mess lines-wise, but, again, there's a lot of plays there we'll touch on. So, starting at the center position, it is a position, rightfully so, headlined by Mr. Connor McDavid, 8,200, the most expensive player on the slate, non-goalie. And, he's certainly there. Competing with him price-wise above 7K are Nathan MacKinnon, Evgeny Malkin. They're both in the upper sevens. And then Tavares, Sagan, Crosby, Kuznetsov, Eichel are in the low to mid sevens. So, if you've been riding the Crosby train, you have certainly not been disappointed. The guy has gone 4 straight games, putting up 8 DraftKings points. And, he's not doing this solely through shot production, obviously, or through point production, because it's pretty tough to put up 8 fantasy points without, putting up some shot numbers. So over those 4 games, he has also put up 17 shots on goal, including 7 just last game against the Islanders. He's playing 20 minutes a night. Again, it's a matchup again against the Islanders. I don't see a reason that Crosby isn't the top center here. You could maybe look at Tavares and Sagan in that game and say, well, that game could shoot out. But, Pittsburgh Islanders is just as likely to shoot out, in my opinion. And we've seen Crosby just go nuts lately. I'm taking the savings there at center. McDavid is in a league of his own. If you can find the 900, he's a fine play. MacKinnon, best served for GPPs in my mind, especially with his line mates. But, they're just super expensive. So I don't really have much interest in playing them for, I think, a combined 20-something K on the slate. Like, that's just a little bit much on the Colorado side in a pretty tough matchup. So I think that you're really looking at Crosby here in the top end. And if you want to get crazy with it, you can go Kuznetsov, because obviously I love Ovechkin at wing, but it's certainly not necessary. Going down the list a little bit into the 6K range, a guy that stands out to me, not really because he's at a good price, but just because the plays around him and below him don't really stand out to me, is Mika Zibanejad. He's 6,600. It doesn't really sit all that well with me, this price. I think he's got a ton of upside. I love his daily fantasy outlook, and especially in this matchup against the Ducks, who have been getting caved in, realistically, from any team they've played against. I mean, they even managed to snap Philly out of their prolonged funk. So Zibanejad's certainly in play here. The reason that I mention him isn't because I think he's as good as a play as Sidney Crosby is for 700 less or anything like that. Like I think he's clearly below Crosby. I am absolutely trying to get up to this 7K range before I play Zibanejad, especially in cash games. But you look at the list below him, it's from the 5.5 up mark. It's guys like Backstrom, Tays on a back-to-back, Draisaitl, pretty much dependent on McDavid. Getzlaf is fine, but now he's 6,300. We were getting him at 5K just, a week ago, and he wasn't 100% owned. So, how great of a play can Getzlaf be at 6,300, especially for cash games? Ryan Johansson, 6,200. Like, no thank you, especially against Tampa on the road. Nico Hischier, Nazem Kadri, who did just score a power play goal last game. So I guess good to see that. First power play goal of the year, goals in 3 straight games. Coincidentally, Austin Matthews being out. So, we've seen the price jump way up on Kadri. Matt Duchene, Dylan Larkin, Sean Monahan, 3 guys that are pretty good. But yeah, I think you guys get the point. Like, if you look at Zibanejad and the guys right below him, I think that he's pretty clearly the best play here. If I had to pick one of the threesome of Duchene, Larkin, Monahan, I'm kind of leaning Monahan here, just for that exposure to Gaudreau, and because Michael Backlund is likely to take on the McKinnon line. So that leaves, Kamenev centering the second line is kind of like the likely matchup for Monahan and Gaudreau, if not that third line of like Soderberg and whatever idiots on Colorado. But basically, you're avoiding the McKinnon matchup, which is a pretty good thing for Monahan. 5,400 is a pretty interesting price on this slate. We have guys like Chris Tierney at the center position at 5,400. On defense, we have they dropped Cholowski down to 5,200. But yeah, just some head scratchers all over the slate realistically. So just wanted to call that one out because props to Chris Tierney for whatever he did to the DraftKings price makers to make him more at the same price as Anze Kopitar. Kopitar's not a daily fantasy guy, for me, but for them being the same price, I'm sure no one expected that when the Erik Karlsson trade went down. And by the way, Erik Karlsson is only $200 more on this slate. So, yeah, pretty exciting stuff there. So that brings us down to Steven Stamkos at 5,300. The theme of this slate, the theme of this season, realistically, has been the fact that DraftKings has been so aggressively pricing teams based on their matchups that it just creates these awesome values that also go under-owned. Like it's kind of insane, just how far like Stamkos has been priced down at this point. Like last game, he was 5,600 going against New Jersey at home. Puts up 9 DraftKings points. 4 shots on goal, 3 points. Pretty solid effort there. He drops 300 because of a matchup with Nashville. Nikita Kucherov in the same mold, 5,900 at the wing position. Again, puts up 5 shots on goal, scores twice, picks up another assist, 3-point night, 11 fantasy points for Kucherov. He goes from 6,300 down to 5,900. Let me be the first one to tell you, I am not afraid of this matchup for Tampa. They can absolutely put up numbers on anyone. And at this price, especially now that Stamkos is center eligible again, given he was a wing before, Stamkos Kucherov is the easiest stack of the night. If you need some like numbers to push you over the edge, Nashville always takes penalties. They've been one of the least disciplined teams in the league for the last season. I'm just pulling up their penalty kill right now. So far this season, they are in the top half of the league in terms of time spent killing penalties per game. So they are a team that I'm not afraid to target, especially when DraftKings is aggressively pricing guys like this. Easy stack there. Some other guys in this general range, Couturier had a pretty nice game against the Ducks, put up 6 shots on goal playing with Giroux and Konechny at 5-on-5 plus first power play time. So getting 20 plus minutes from a guy at 5,100 like Couturier is not too bad there. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, 5,200, is a fine play. He's been priced down a little bit despite his last 2 games going for 2 goals, 2 assists, and 5 shots on goal. He's gone from 5,900 down to 5,200 given the matchup with San Jose. So 2 plays there that I think are fine in GPPs, but not really interested in cash just because Stamkos is right there. Like, just play Stamkos, just play Kucherov. Like, you're fine. I promise you the matchup is not that scary. And, they could bust, but so could guys in awesome matchups. They could also bust. So, it's not really, it's just more of a price thing for me than anything else. All right, going down the list at center, there's really not a whole lot I like as like a middling punt play until you get to Nolan Patrick. For whatever reason, he went from 3,700 against Anaheim down to 3,400 here against the Kings. He is playing on the first power play unit. He did pick up a goal and an assist against the Ducks. Only 1 shot on goal, but last year he showed a pretty decent shot floor, so I'm not that concerned with his relative struggles lately. He hasn't put up multiple shots in his last 5 games. But for that price, I think he's more than fine. He's a pretty, he's obviously a super talented player, and the Philly power play should look like Patrick and Konechny replacing Simmons and Voracek. Quick side note there, Philly did, when they were leading last game, put Simmons and Voracek back on the first power play towards the end of the game. That was, in Coach Haxtell's words, because they wanted some more familiarity back there, so they weren't giving up like odd man rushes or anything like that. And today in practice on Wednesday, they ran Patrick and Konechny on that unit like expected. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. And then we get to some pretty super punt type plays. Michael Rasmussen at 2,500 is playing on the first power play for the Detroit Red Wings. Like I mentioned in the recap, Thomas Vanek is out. That he joins Nielsen and Athanasiou in the infirmary for the Red Wings, so they're really hurting for players. And Rasmussen is getting a solid, 14 to 15 minutes a night, or 13 to 14 minutes if you want to be specific. And last game, he kind of broke out, scored his first goal in the NHL, and put 4 shots on net. Interestingly, it was also his 10th game in the NHL, so he's officially sticking around. So it's a really nice combination of he just scored, they just put this nice confidence boost into Rasmussen, and also showed their confidence in him by not sending him back. So it seems like they have plans to use him. He's getting the power play time, to begin with. And they're so banged up at forward that there's really not much else to do with those minutes. He's not going to get 20 minutes or anything, but for 2.5 with power play time, you can certainly depend on him for, 14 minutes again with an outside shot of having a really nice game. So I like that play for 2,500. It's nothing crazy, but he's there if you need him. And in that same vein, Vladislav Kamenev, centering the second line, I have a bit more hesitation with him. I think given the Rasmussen being there, I prefer him. But for whatever reason, if you like Kamenev, if you like this matchup better for Kamenev, that's totally fine to play him. He's got some talent. In the AHL so far, Kamenev did have 16 points in 17 games last year before getting called up. It's pretty tough to judge him based on his NHL numbers, just because he hasn't really been getting a great role. But he's 22 and has some pedigree in terms of being a productive offensive player. So I'm willing to buy in on him at 2,500. But again, on this slate, I prefer Rasmussen. This is where I'm talking about like maybe smaller slates. If you need some value on the late slate at 9 o'clock, you throw in Kamenev and kind of fit whatever you want in there. But just a thought. Going over to the wing position, it starts with Alex Ovechkin, 8,100, road matchup against Montreal. Ovechkin, there's no hangover there. It's pretty much clear to me at this point. The guy has 4 shots per game. He's scoring basically a goal per game. If you can get 5 points locked into your lineup with huge upside going against a Montreal team that has realistically been a lot of smoke and mirrors so far, their numbers are decent. Possession wise, obviously they've been putting up points. In the standings, so can't really dismiss that. But Ovechkin clearly is in a class of his own. I don't really think there's much of a reason to dip down. Patrick Kane is the second wing here. He actually missed on Wednesday due to an illness. I can't tell you what illness it was, whether maybe he what's the Vancouver club that everyone goes anyways, Kane's been known to do some silly things, but it's likely just a precautionary thing, even if he is like actually sick, which I expect to be the case. But I don't really see a need to pay for him given the uncertainty there. Kyle Palmieri, Phil Kessel, Marchessault, Rantanen, Taylor Hall, those are the 7K guys. I don't see myself playing any of these guys. I'm going to find the money to pay for Ovechkin. If I need to take a lesser defenseman or go cheap at center, I'll do that. So where it gets interesting, I think, is the 6.5 to like 7K range, because we have guys like Taylor Hall down here against the Detroit Red Wings. Pretty good player in Taylor Hall. Also 400 less than Palmieri, which Palmieri's been good. We discussed this on Tuesday, but yeah, just Taylor Hall's the guy there, so not that concerned. Forsberg, tough matchup, not really for me. Panarin, interestingly, hasn't been priced down like his buddy Cam Atkinson was, given that Atkinson was 6,900 before last game, went down to 6,100. Panarin was 7,400, only went down to 6,800. So you're getting a little bit of value in Panarin. I think that line is pretty interesting for tournaments, especially if you like, a Brent Burns or something, kind of play the up-tempo nature that the Sharks have been playing all year. I like that. Jeff Skinner, 6,700, just seems like a lot. He's not likely to be out there in like end game situations. He's not really going to play 20 to 22 minutes like a lot of these guys up here could. A guy right there at the same price is Vladimir Tarasenko at home going against the Vegas Golden Knights, playing with his old buddies, Braden Shen and Jaden Schwartz. We last saw them on Saturday, just have an absolute field day against the Blackhawks. So I think Tarasenko at 6,600 is a fine top wing if you're going to do it. If you just don't want to play Ovechkin, Tarasenko's your guy here. So going down the list, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, 6,200, playing with McDavid. What's nice about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is that on the season, he has multiple shots in every single game, including 5 shots in 2 of his last 3 games. So he's, what I like about guys playing with McDavid is when they shoot the puck. Like, McDavid could set you up, but if you're trying to give him the puck back, if you're trying to do silly stuff with it, obviously it's not great for fantasy purposes. The Nuge is just out there on the power play, killing penalties, doing everything with McDavid in lockstep. So I like getting that exposure against a tired Blackhawks team for only 6,200. And I think he's pretty clearly like the non-Tarasenko, non-Kucherov top wing play here. Another name that interests me in this general price range is Thomas Hertl, 5,900. Kind of seems like Hertl Couture is the first line in San Jose. Pavelski's getting a good amount of run. He's getting, that first power play time. But like Hertl and Couture are so explosive. They are regularly eclipsing the 20-minute mark on the season. So I think it's actually the Hertl show in San Jose. I don't see myself playing him here with Kucherov at the same price, but I think going forward, I'll be looking more closely at Hurdle than I am like Pavelski. Just thinking about that out loud. Mr. Jason Pominville playing his 1,000th game for the Sabres on Thursday night. 5,500 playing with Eichel and Skinner. That line is so expensive that I don't really see them being like GPP viable for me. However, if you're interested, Pominville has been playing pretty well alongside Eichel and Skinner with first power play time to go with it, so not a bad play there. A line that I don't think I mentioned at the center position on this slate to keep an eye on is the Anaheim first line. Getzlaf and Rakell are obviously there. Their prices are kind of reasonable. I actually, if it weren't for their third line mate and Pontus Aberg being only 3K, I would actually not really have that much interest in it. However, when you add in that extra like savings at the wing position in Aberg, I don't really see how you can go wrong. So a quick catch up: Pontus Aberg has 2 shots on goal in each of his last 2 games. In each of those 2 games, both of his shots have gone in the net. Pretty obvious, glaring red flag right off the top there. And as longtime listeners might know, I tend to run away from these, as fast as I can. Like, I want no part in it. The ownership's likely going to go through the roof. But in this instance, they've been looking for a guy to produce, Anaheim has. I mean, clearly they've been one of the worst teams in the league, buoyed by John Gibson to begin the year, going insane and still playing insanely well. But they're looking for a guy who can, do exactly what Aberg's doing here. So, interestingly, at the end of last game, they took Adam Henrique off of the first power play unit and replaced him with Aberg. And he rewarded Carlisle's trust by scoring a power play goal, like on that same shift, to tie the game, which they then, I believe, blew pretty much immediately. However, it's still like a really good thing to see him get that first power play time, and that's the reason that I'm so interested in Aberg here. It's not for the 5-on-5. Oh well, he scored twice, he's got to be good. It's more by Carlisle putting him in that position to succeed, not only on the first line, but also saying, hey, can you handle the first power play? And then him scoring immediately. It just makes me think that he's got a lot of leash that most guys at the 3K range who jump up to these top roles, they don't see. And it's nice that he's been producing, obviously, but it's more of the confidence and the, hey, something would have to go terribly wrong for me to say, all right, you're going back to the 4th line or wherever Aberg lived before. I honestly couldn't tell you. He could have been in the press box for all I know. But if he's going to get 17, 18 minutes, power play one time, and first line time with Getzlaf and Rakell against the Rangers, all aboard. So I like that Rakell, Getzlaf, Aberg stack. And going below Rakell at the wing position, just rattling off a few names here because I think I've rambled on a little bit too much for this solo episode. Ty Ratty is day to day. I don't think he'll play Thursday night, but he's a name to keep in mind. I guess I should say only 5K because he's not a 5K player, but he might slot in alongside McDavid. So kind of something to keep an eye on there. Patrick Marleau at 4,800 is getting promoted to the first power play in Toronto. He is also playing with John Tavares at 5-on-5. So definitely a nice spot there at 4,800 for Marleau. Apologies, he's playing with Nazem Kadri at 5-on-5, but still in that top 6 and on the power play. So Marleau's probably going to go up in price if he has a good game. So this might be a time to get it on the ground floor for, nothing crazy, but a fine play there. For Pittsburgh, we saw Dominic Simone play alongside Crosby on Tuesday night. He ended up scoring a goal and putting up 6 shots on goal. So if you played that Simone Crosby mini stack, you probably smashed. Simone has been priced up to 4,200, which has me a little bit concerned, but it's definitely worth a look, especially if you just can't quite get the Crosby in your cash team and you want to play a guy. Simone does not have a long track record of like shot production like he had last game. 6 shots on goal likely isn't going to happen. But when you're playing the Islanders, when you're playing with Crosby, you can kind of throw like the historical precedents out for individual players. Like Crosby is one of those guys that will find you for whatever if he wants to find you, he will. And so it's good to see Simone make the most of that in their most recent game. And at that same price range, I am not going to jump on this Jordan Eberle train. He scored twice last game, 3 shots on goal, playing with Barzal, but he's just not a shooter. Like, it's weird because I've had this vision of him like as a great shot rate guy, but dating back to last year, his shot numbers have not been all that good. And for some reason, I can't spell Jordan Eberle's name right. But on the season, like a guy like Artem Anisimov, William Karlsson, Kyle Clutterbuck have better shot rates than him so far. So it is kind of interesting just because of the fact that he is playing with Matt Barzal. You would think that when Barzal passes it to him, he's the shooter on that line, but that just really hasn't been the case. So he's cheap, he's in a good role, and you might find a lot of recency bias, say, to play Jordan Eberle, but I think that there's a bit more to Eberle than the recent stats may indicate, and honestly, what my initial leaning would indicate, because I thought of him as like the sniper guy, who would take shots when he had the opportunity, and the numbers just bear out that that's not really been the case for him. An interesting play in New Jersey, I think, is Anthony Mantha at 3,900. He's been getting some pretty solid minutes for them, and that's really been the main issue in Mantha's career. Just kind of getting off of that, like you're getting out of the doghouse. And so, with the injuries, with the power play time, playing with Larkin at 5-on-5, I think all those are pretty good signs for Mantha at only 3,900. And finally, at 3,500, Edmonton at the end of last game actually was playing Drake Caggiula with Connor McDavid. I can't say for sure that that'll be the case on Thursday night, as it might have been for a reason unrelated to Yamamoto's performance. I'm just not sure. But keep an eye on that in morning skate for the Oilers, because clearly a guy playing with McDavid, we've seen this movie so many times that I don't think he's catch viable, but certainly in tournaments, Caggiula would just need to pot a goal, and he's likely to be super low owned and pretty excited if he scores a goal for you, obviously, at that price. At 3,000, we already mentioned Pontus Aberg, so certainly fine to play him. Any format, I think he is the clear top punt here for the reasons I mentioned before. And that'll pretty much do it for the wing position. There's no real 2.5K crappers that you might have found at center. So well, realistically, Chris Kunitz, if Vander or Patrick Kane misses on Thursday night, Chris Kunitz was playing with Brandon Saad, and Artem Anisimov at 5-on-5. So I'm actually kind of interested to see if he picked up that power play time that Kane vacated. If he's out 2.5, that might be a place you can look, but definitely not going to go too hard there. All right, let's run through defense real quickly. I think you guys know my general philosophy at defense. Play guys who just seem underpriced. There are so many players at defense that are great fantasy assets, fantasy contributors that splitting apart matchups just doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially because so much of defense scoring comes from block shots. So it's almost, a paradox in that you want guys in good matchups, but guys in bad matchups are actually more likely to put up these monster floor games where they take shots on goal because they're losing, they're firing from everywhere, and they're also, early on getting bombarded with shot attempts, getting scored on almost like because they can step in front of those shots, they can block them. It's all fantasy scoring relevant. So with that in mind, I really like Brent Burns, 6,500. John Carlson is 7K. If you're stacking around Ovechkin, sure. But I just think Ovechkin is so dynamic, such a good one-off play on most slates, that sometimes, Carlson will burn you, or Kuznetsov will get 3 assists and a goal. But it's almost certainly going to be the Ovechkin show. He's the shooter. So I'm totally fine playing him as a one-off. So I don't feel the need to play Carlson over Brent Burns. I don't get this Brent Burns price. I'll tell you that much. He's on a 9-game point streak. He's putting up, he's not putting up these monster shot games, but, he doesn't need to because he's producing so well offensively. And I think that, if they're in a situation where they're trailing for a long period of time, he certainly could put up those monster shot games. Like, it's not like he's any less involved offensively. I think it's just more of he's finding guys better than he was before for whatever reason. Thomas Chabot at 6,100 has been absolutely incredible. Just don't play him. Just do not. I mean, I love him. I think he's an incredible player. It's interesting that he kind of is playing the Erik Karlsson role for this team, logging 25 minutes a night with first power play time, even when they're going 11-7, which is a pretty interesting stat. I mean, you would expect, even when Karlsson was in a situation where with 7 defensemen, he would sometimes get like 23, 24 minutes. So it's really good to see that out of Chabot, but the pricing just doesn't reflect his, the ability to play him, I think, and feel any sort of confidence in it. Seth Jones, 5,700, really like that price. If you're stacking Columbus, again, Seth Jones is a good play there. Oscar Klefbom, 5,600. He's a guy who's been pretty far priced up, but I mean, he's probably been the best defense shot generator, not named Dougie Hamilton, over the last stretch of games. Not only is he just shooting the puck on net a ton, like he's playing 30 minutes a night. Like that is not a joke. Like, you can probably pencil him in for 27 to 28 minutes. He has yet to score a goal despite having 37 shots on goal. I think something's got to give for him. And if he can produce like this without the goals coming, when he does score, he's going to smash. So I think he's still an okay play at 5,600. Some other defensemen that I am interested in here. Ryan McDonagh at 4,500. Like I mentioned, he did take over that Victor Hedman's power play role as of Tuesday's game. So nice to see, solid 20 minutes out of McDonagh. And he did have 5 shots on goal, 3 block shots, and a 3-point night. So, his price doesn't really match the role that he is projected to play here. Ivan Provorov at 4K seems kind of low. He's a guy that is going to get the minutes. He does play that second power play for Philly, so not, an ideal play there. But he is really involved at both ends of the ice. He's not afraid to jump in the rush. So I think 4K is a pretty decent price for that. Ryan Pulock, same kind of deal, except Pulock actually doesn't have the same shot numbers that I was kind of expecting to go into this season. But 3,900, I love matchups against Pittsburgh, so a name there that I kind of like. I might be done with Dahlin, until we see like 24, 25 minutes out of him because he just isn't really shooting. He doesn't seem like he's going to be a great blocks guy. I think Risto kind of shows that he has a unique DFS skill set, and that even though I think Dahlin in general is better for the Sabres power play than Risto might be, that Risto has this one, he's more likely to shoot the puck, and two, he's much more likely to kind of be hanging around in front of the net and just throw his body in front of a shot. That could be because Risto gets caved in more than Rasmus Dahlin does, but uh, whatever the case, I think 3,800 is a good time to jump off of Dahlin and kind of wait to see, make him prove it to us before we start playing him. Because interestingly, he's actually the only defenseman his price or more expensive that is averaging below 1 fantasy point per game or below 2 fantasy points per game this year. Just a little dumb stat that may only interest me, but he's certainly not been productive even with a pretty cushy role. So should Chris Letang miss again? Maybe one of the more interesting situations going up to Tuesday lock was the status of Chris Letang as a game time decision. He ended up sitting out the game. And on the first power play, Juuso Riikola replaced him. He didn't really have a great fantasy performance. However, he did play 18 minutes, obviously got that first power play time that didn't seem to ever go anywhere else. And he's still 2,700. So should Letang miss again, Riikola is likely a lock for cash games just for that awesome exposure. However, I would expect Letang to play. He was a game time decision last time out. They lost, and he's traveling with the team, so I would expect him to be good to go. But should he miss again, that might be. It's good that we have that confirmation that Riikola was the first power play guy. I think I mentioned a couple shows ago that I did look into some of his like overseas numbers because I believe he came from Finland, the Finnish league. He had some pretty poor shot numbers. It just wasn't really impressive. However, 2,700 for that sort of exposure just makes a lot of sense. So if we don't get that news, I'm likely just going to spend up at defense. I think we've mentioned definitely at the center position, especially, there's a lot of value. So I don't really feel overly inclined to force in one of these cheap defensemen. But if you do, Nick Kronwall, 2,500, he sucks, but he's going to play 18 to 19 minutes. He's probably going to block some shots because again, he sucks. And he actually is like playing on the power play. So 2,500 for that it's fine. I hate it personally, but you can't argue with the numbers with where the math leads you. So a fine play in Nick Kronwall if you're just totally punting it. All right, I think that does it. Let me get out of here with a couple guaranteed goals and some stacks. I'm going to start with the stacks because it's a solo show. I'm going to do it the way I want it, and the stacks are really just coming easy to me. I might give you a few bonus stacks as well. Tampa won. Don't sleep on them. Like I just cannot tell you enough how much I am going to play of Stamkos, Kucherov. JT Miller has even been priced down to 4,400, despite being on that first line with those two and on the first power play with those two. I'm just not afraid of this matchup to make this, I think they're a solid 4K less than they should be. Like, I think Kucherov is a 7,500 player. I think Stamkos is a 67, Logan Couture-esque priced player. I think JT Miller, given this role, is a 5,800 type player, like a Jake Gensel, but with power play time. Like, there's no reason for them to be this cheap. And so you are literally saving, by my estimation, about 3,000 in salary. So, I think they're just the easiest play of the slate without a doubt. Next up, I'm going to be looking at some St. Louis, Tarasenko, Shen, Schwartz. You know, again, they strike me as a little bit too cheap as well. And I think that, they haven't been playing together on the power play, which is the only, I think, downside to them. But this matchup with Vegas should be up tempo. It should be a fun one. And I think they have a good amount of 5-on-5 upside to them. Anaheim, first line, they're likely to be super popular. Aberg will probably be through the roof, price wise or ownership wise. So, but if that doesn't concern you, Aberg, Getzlaff, Raquel, Cam Fowler could differentiate that team, being he is only 40 or 5,300 playing on the first power play. And not only is he not really does he have that offensive upside, but he does have block shot upside as well. He's had 30 block shots in 10 games, so just a pretty safe floor Fowler with some explosive upside. Doesn't really need to do a ton to meet value and help your GPP team to a big win. So a couple more stacks. I'm going right back to the Philly well. If you want to stack up that Patrick Gostisbehere maybe on the power play, I'm all about it. I think Patrick is just far too cheap at 3,400 given his talent. And Gostisbehere is obviously like a better one-off play than I think a Giroux or a Couturier or a Konechny is, the other three guys on that power play unit, given that they are on the first line. But any of them, if you're looking for a mini stack, I think is also okay to play themselves or with Nolan Patrick, and is a full line stack. So keep that in mind. And then I'm going to get a little bit spicy and go with Columbus. I think they'll be super low owned here, and I like getting Dubois, Atkinson, Panarin, and Seth Jones in there. So I think that's 4 or 5 of my top stacks of the night. If you are looking for more, be sure to stay tuned to the GroupMe as we get news and morning skate updates. I will be sure to, we'll be sure as a group to inform you of just about every change that we can find. And secondly, whatever DFS implications that may have. So it's always a great time in there. DM our Twitter account at Morning Skate Pod on Twitter if you want access to that. It's free, access meaning an invite to it, but it's all free. And let's close this off with some guaranteed goals. So I know, I'm kind of cheating because I set a lot of stacks and we don't normally do our guaranteed goals from those stacks. But Nikita Kucherov at 5,900 is just a free square. I'm sorry. I just have to do it. It's not. Trust me, guys. It's not really something that I feel good about because, we have this hard, fast rule. You can't take a stack and then say the guy is your guaranteed goal because, it's not as fun. But for me, the fun will be in just jamming a Kucherov and letting people fade him because of the matchup. And, hopefully it works out. For me, not for them, because I think you're dumb to fade him. But that leaves me with about 5,100 to, make the 11K mark work. I'm going to get a little bit crazy with it, and I'm going to go with Jaden Schwartz, 4,700. He's not really a goal scorer type, but the shots have been there for him, multiple shots in each of his last 4 games. He plays so well with Tarasenko historically that I think this price is just a little bit silly. And I'm also hopeful that the power play in St. Louis might start to feature him along with Tarasenko a little bit more. I'm not sold on Pat Maroon being this, guy worthy of, basically shifting an entire power play around to make sure that Jaden Schwartz is not on it. So regardless, though, I think that even at 5-5, Jaden Schwartz and Tarasenko are a great 1-2 punch. So I'm going to go with those two as my guaranteed goals. All right, so that will do it for a rather long solo episode. I try to keep these shorter, but I think there's a lot to cover on this slate with 12 games, and you got a little bit of showdown, picks or news, I guess. I didn't really pick anyone, but if you want to pick Nick Ehlers because, playing with Wheeler and Scheifele, that's fine. but, fun little interlude aside, that'll do it for the Morning Skate podcast. So as I mentioned, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Morning Skate Pod. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Fake Moods. And be sure to wish DJ a very happy birthday. You can find him at DJ_Mitchell94. So let's close this show out with a big happy birthday to DJ. And we'll head home. All right. From Doug, from the birthday boy, and from myself, have a good slate, everybody, and we will see ya.